and it's windy in intervals, so maybe you'll be able to hear something. I wanted to jump off one of Bufo's videos. She made a video about rules that she has set for herself that she wants to break. And I actually wrote notes here in my diary. And there's quite a lot there, so I'm just going to read out what the rules that I want to break. And some of them are the same as her rules that she wants to break, because it was quite similar. So one of the rules, so basically I say what I don't need to do. I don't need to tell everyone everything. I don't need to keep my body and appearance unchanged. I don't need to avoid failure at all costs. I don't need to Skype my parents every week and meet my family 2 times a year. I don't need to be quiet and think I'm weak. I don't need to avoid sports or be doomed to be bad at sports. I don't need to be liked or understood by anyone. I don't need to avoid trying for fear of it not being perfect. I don't need to limit myself to things I have skills in. I don't need to dismiss or diminish my achievements. I don't need to hide my opinions or avoid the spotlight. I don't need to blend in. I don't need to be in therapy in order to grow. And I'm going to go back to Bufo's video where she talks about different things that I relate to. So she talks about how identity, how she doesn't need to take everybody's narrative of herself into her identity. She talks about how she thought that all input about who she was needed to be considered, and that her being was being, like that she was run by a committee, and like all of her thoughts were run by everybody else basically. And that is kind of true for me too. She also talked about how her identity was like this weed plant, this climbing plant called kudzu, of layers of what people think about her. And so one of her roles about herself was that she needed to be liked, and she doesn't need to be liked universally. And I relate to that. Like, there is this thing of like, okay, so am I me or am I what everybody else thinks of me? You know? She then talks about how she can't default to acting like a helpless baby, in quotation marks, right? Because people who are invested in your weaknesses and not your strengths are, not worth taking the opinions of. And also she is trying to give up this idea of herself as the small girl who's crying and waiting for blows to rain on her, and instead like parenting this inner child by picking this child off the ground and forcing her kind of to act in life, and trusting the inner child. What the inner child loves is trusted, rather than like not being able to trust this child who is just vulnerable to everything. She talks about how she makes complications for herself through these roles, which, yeah, I agree for myself. And if somebody has a narrative about you, you should be able to laugh at it rather than taking it in just as deeply as your own view of yourself. And she says she doesn't have to defend herself against others, and I agree. There is this difficult to not defend yourself when you know, you there's this need to, like a rule that you have to defend yourself, when really you don't have to. You can just keep living without taking all of these things in. Also, not telling everybody everything. Just because you're not telling everybody anything doesn't mean that you're lying by omission. It just means that you're keeping boundaries. And she talks about how if you're always like accepting whatever people are narratives about you, then you'll be prone to, you're vulnerable to people who want to change you or keep you in a place that is actively like killing you from the inside. So, you know, you can't entertain all of the toxic narratives about yourself in order to be your true self. So, and then she talks about how, quote, creating a cognitive dissonance by trying to unify all these narratives. That every leaf of every vine of the Kudzo, analyzing every leaf of every vine of the Kudzo is not going to work anymore. End quote. So I really do relate to that crazy state of being where it's like you're trying to understand who you are according to what other people are thinking of you, and it's like it doesn't make sense and it's not going to work. So by being, she talks about how if I say what I mean and I mean what I say and not apologizing for existing, that is a better way of being than by trying to be liked and then creating a bad impression because of that, and then other people having a bad impression that is now taken in by the person, and then these bad impressions become a part of who you think that you are. She talks about how, what does these people's narratives about us tell us? It tells us more about what the person is, something that is completely unrelated to the actual person that is being judged. It tells more about the person who is doing the judging. So, yeah. Also, quote, people are just jerks. Yeah, that is true. And she does talk about how her partner said that she was the strongest person that he's ever known, and that the areas in which she has courage are rare for people to have courage in, which I agree. And I think that it was a wonderful video to watch and to witness. It was, sometimes you witness things on the internet, or just things in your friends' lives, and you're like, you notice that there's an epiphany going on, and that there is, you're seeing something awe-inspiring. You're seeing something that is truly life-changing for that person, and it's beautiful. And I was deeply moved by that video because, you know, it goes back to like the beginning of her channel and everything, and I've seen the whole process. Of course, I only see a small window, right? Because, you know, ourselves on the internet, we're not really ourselves, are we? But from the small sliver of what I see, I've seen the transformation. Of course, we all have good days and bad days, and, you know, there'll be days where things are going to be difficult, and days where it's going to be easier and such, but you see that there is a progression in the thought process, that we're growing and maturing and being so much better and so much. I mean, Bufo has always been kind and loving, but this is even more so than before. And I love that for her. And so I want to also grow in that way. I think that some of you maybe have noticed some of my epiphany videos, where there's a subtle shift somewhere. And I'm sure that you guys have all experienced something like this for yourselves at certain points in your life. It's just that since I have a YouTube channel, like I sometimes have insights that are then shown to the world. Well, most people do this kind of thing quietly. But I think that I'm not ready right now. I'm not at that phase right now to be at an epiphany of how to like break out of the roles that I've had for myself. At the moment, I'm just figuring out how to deal with this new information of my autism and my new role as a doctor and that kind of thing. So and also I'm also navigating like what is my new role in my family, now that my brother is an adult, and that I am doing so much separate from my family for the first time in my life. I'm trying to navigate, being more responsible on my house and that kind of thing, but at the moment I'm not yet on the cusp of like figuring out anything much bigger than that. I think that sometimes you need like an event to spur things on, and at the moment, because I'm like conserving my energy, I'm not like starting the things that I need to start. But I mean, one day that day will come where I'll start to challenge these old ideas, and I can notice that I've already challenged some of these ideas before in the past. Like the fact that I needed to be quiet and not have opinions. I mean, now I have a YouTube channel. I mean, there were rules that I had for myself as a child that I don't have anymore, and rules that I have for myself now that I won't have in 10 years or whatever. So I'm not at that point yet, but I'm hoping to get to that point. I'll see if I can talk about this in therapy. My therapist, I think my therapist was sick, so on the same day that I was going to go to therapy, it got cancelled. So I don't really know how to deal with this now, but we'll see. I'll just leave this to rest for now, but I'll make another video once I've figured more things out. Anyway, have a great day, everybody. Bye.